Okay, welcome to my talk, Practice Makes Perfect when it comes to RxJS. With this talk, I plan to show you the easiest way to learn RxJS in the best way from my point of view. After this talk, you won't be able to use RxJS, but you know how to get into it, and you also see the benefits of it. So let's dive into that. And to make this, I want to start with an analogy. So when I started to ride a bicycle, actually, the first thing that happened to me was me sitting on my bike and hitting the fence of my neighbors because I was not able to do it properly. And it looked kind of like that. So here's like some kind of footage, just that it was a fence and not a tree. But even though we failed miserably at the very first time, we kept practicing, we repeated the process, we did it again, we retried it, and after some time we become fairly professional riding a bicycle. I never became that professional, but in general. So actually, from my point of view, it's completely the same for RxJS. So what you do, or what you should do from my point of view, is you should practice it by implementing some kind of stuff. You will always understand more and more and more, and you will get it with it. I promise you. Okay, so we already talked a lot about me, so I'll just skip it now. And what I want to show you is when you start with RxJS, you will face all these different words and all these different concepts, and it's really overwhelming at the very beginning. From my point of view, you don't need to know about all those concepts. I probably don't. And it's not important to be professional with RxJS. You need to understand the key concepts. And therefore, once a very smart man, I can barely remember who it was, but he once said to me, observables itself don't cause problem. Establishing a reactive mindset does. And this is actually the key point why RxJS is so difficult. It's about learning reactive programming, not about observables, operators, subjects, whatever. So I have another analogy, actually, because from my point of view, it's very comparable to learning a foreign language. And for me, this was actually my first foreign language was English. So the first time, or if you compare these two languages to my mother tongue, German, you actually notice that there are some words that are fairly similar, like hello and hello. Just from hearing the words, you can probably kind of understand it and you would at least guess the meaning. There are also words that are completely the same, like code, kindergarten, mostly for historic reasons, but still, the words are the same, the meaning is the same. I also learned recently that there are way more complex words like poltergeist that are completely the same. But anyway, what I want to head to is actually the fact that there are also words that don't make any sense if you translate them. Like in Germany, we have the saying of an ohrwurm, which is if a song keeps stuck in your head. If you would translate that in English, earworm sounds so gross. Like, Jesus Christ, what's going on here? And from my point of view, it's the same for reactive programming. From university and stuff like that, you will probably be exposed to imperative programming already a lot. Therefore, it's really good in comparison here. So on the imperative side, we have things like accessing an element in an array. What you're used to is like using the square brackets. It's also fairly tech agnostic or like language agnostic. But if you're coming in reactive programming with RxJS, you're not having that kind of mechanism. What you rather do is using an operator with first, and this kind of would work, right? If you see like first, you would kind of guess like, okay, this is probably the first element from something. There are also things that are completely the same, like in imperative programming and reactive programming. So in JavaScript, we have now filter and map, right? We also have the same in reactive programming. But if you ever try to call a function in reactive programming, now you need to subscribe to that. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's not really intuitive. And I don't even want to start with how you do if statements in RxJS or in reactive programming at all. So my key takeaway here is thinking reactively needs practice. You won't be able to apply reactive programming or RxJS just by reading the docs. So therefore, and especially because I also suck at designing slides, I thought it would be the best to just do some live coding. This way, you will see some of the benefits of RxJS, but you will also see, by just observing me talking about reactive programming, learn a lot about the key concepts itself. And what I want to do in this presentation is actually implementing something like a carousel. So you can use the mouse to swipe to the next slide. You can use keyboard navigation to go back and forth. And also there's a timer going automatically to the next slide. So this is what we want to code within these 45 minutes. And therefore, let's move to VS Code. Let me slightly increase the font size and close the sidebar as it's not really useful. OK, this should be a good font size. So I already prepared a little bit because, well, live coding is difficult, right? So what we have here is actually an Angular application. And inside an Angular component, I wrapped all the logic here. So I want my carousel to support touch and mouse gestures the same way. Therefore, I merged those two events together. And to start from the very beginning, what is a swipe gesture? Because that's what I want to start with. A swipe is pretty much the touch start is a kind of starting signal. Then we have a move gesture, which are a lot of move events, until we get a mouse up or touch end, or however it's called. So this is what describes a swipe gesture. So let's start with that. Please don't get confused by this prevent event propagation here. It's just a mechanism that I added because I added this application to my slide so that I don't go to the next slide. That was very tricky, actually. OK, so I prepared this already, where I just merged together the touch start and mouse down events so that I can just treat these two gestures similarly. Then we go over to the swipe itself. I already said for the swipe, we have the touch start, and then we want to listen to all the move gestures. So what we do is we're using the switch map operator here, placing proper brackets. Sorry for jumping around like a maniac. OK. So in this switch map, we get the event from the touch start, and we want to pass that to our touch move observable. So let's take a look at touch move. So in touch move, I already merged together the move gesture, the touch move and mouse move gesture. And now I want to do several things here within this pipe. What I want to do is apply observe on with a scheduling operator, which is a scheduling operator, and I want to pass the animation frame scheduler. Actually, there are several good talks about scheduling, particularly out there by Michael Lutke, who I think is doing the talk right after me. So if you're interested in that, check the talks out there on YouTube as well. And then I want to do is using take until, because I already mentioned that we are interested in the move events until we release the finger from the mouse. So we are using take until and saying like, OK, if either touch and or mouse up event happens, we are not interested in any move events happening. So we are saying, OK, we are creating an observable here from event with the native element, which is just the host element of the Angular component. And then we're saying touch end or from event native element mouse up. OK, so much about that. The next thing we want to do is calculate the delta from the start point to the end point of our movement, so that we can find out if we want to go to the next page, because what we want to prevent is that the user just slightly move the mouse, and therefore we already go to the next page. So I, again, prepared a little bit. I kind of feel like in this cooking shows, you know, where you say like, OK, you just need to do this and that, and all of a sudden you have put a whole dish on the plate. It's not like that. But so I prepared a method here, calculate delta, where I pass the number of items inside my carousel. This calculate delta, I think. Oh, I also need to pass the start event. Yes, that makes sense. OK, let me sorry, I just named it event. Let me quickly jump into that just to show it really briefly. So this calculate delta method shows you on the one hand also how you program custom operators on your own. And what it's doing, it's pretty much calculating the delta from the start point. That's why we need the start event for to the endpoint until we release the mouse. And the only thing that we now need to do further is if you ever subscribe to move gestures inside the browser, you will notice that this event happens a bazillion times in a second. So therefore, we will also get a very finely granular delta calculation here. But actually for saying, OK, we want to go to the next slide, we are just interested in the very last value before the user releases mouse. And therefore, we are using take last here without this weird. So much about the swipe gesture. So now what I want to do is I put this in my event observable because later on I also want to add keyboard navigation. And therefore, I have one combined observable of those events for swipe and keyboard navigation. The next thing I already prepared is having a merged observable with events and timer, where I see, OK, is the delta higher than a threshold or less than a threshold? Then go to the previous or next page. If not, pretty much do nothing. Very important, apply take until to also ensure that you're unsubscribing from your observable, and even more important, subscribe to that observable. Otherwise, nothing will happen. OK, if I didn't do any major mistakes, we should already be able to swipe. And you can see we are, which is good. This is actually a very cute picture. OK, swipe gesturing is working. Let's go to keyboard navigation. Therefore, again, we're using from event, where the thing is keyboard events are emitted to the document element itself and not to a certain element. Therefore, we are passing here document. And the next, additionally, we want to specify the event itself, which is key down. Unfortunately, from event is not properly typed for architectural reasons. Therefore, we have to apply a cast here. But we are not interested in all keyboard events. We are just interested in keyboard events that happen on the key A or D, as left and right arrow would also trigger my slides. So what I'm saying here is we're getting an event of type keyboard event. And then I say event.code is equal to key A. And if so, I just want to go to the previous page. Therefore, I already go to previous page. Therefore, I already prepared a constant, which is just one less than the threshold to go to the previous page. We apply the same logic for the right arrow observable, just besides the fact that we want to use QD as going to the right side. And instead of going to the previous page, we want to go to the next page. And again, if I didn't mess anything up, we should now be able, I'm taking off my right hand from my mouse, and we are able to go to switch between those slides. Fantastic. OK. That was fairly straightforward compared. Wait a sec. I had to merge this together here. This is actually one thing that I forgot. I'm kind of surprised how this even worked now. Didn't it recompile? Isn't this the latest version? Where is my navigation bar? Localhost. OK, this looks right. OK, anyway, it's working. OK. Come back to the timer, actually. So for the timer, we want to use the interval operator, which is using set interval under the hood. This kind of makes sense. So pretty much every 5 seconds now, it would it is supposed to go to the next slide. But what happens if the user would swipe within this 5 seconds? We want the timer to restart, right? Otherwise, we would, for example, if the user would after 4 seconds swipe, he goes to the next slide, and then after a second, he would go to the next slide again without even looking at the picture. So what we want to do is actually, as soon as one of those events happen, we want to resubscribe to our interval. Therefore, what we use is take until and specify events here as input observable. Now the thing is, take until internally also subscribes to this event, to this events observable, which would cause all the events, all our event listener that we registered here to be registered twice, what we don't really need. What we could use, therefore, is applying a multicasting operator like share for our purposes. And in this way, it would just subscribe once to the events, and we're good to go. We saved some memory. Now what would happen is, as soon as one of those events is emitting, it would complete our timer and unsubscribe from that. What we want, actually, is that it restarts. Therefore, we apply repeat when. Repeat when takes a notifier observable that is an observable that emits void as soon as the source observable completes. And we need to return another observable that specifies when to resubscribe to our observable. So these two lines can be read as resubscribe when events emit something. And besides that, what we also want to do is that we say, OK, go to the next page after 5 seconds. One last missing bit that we need to add is, from my point of view, if we would go now to the last page and it would wait 5 seconds, it would just stop there. From my perspective, for this automatic timer thing, I would appreciate it if it would animate back to the first slide, if it's already on the last slide. And therefore, again, I prepared a helper method. I should become a chef. So if software development is not working, I will become a TV chef. So let's see here. We specify animate back to first slide. We pass the items there. And we already merged event and timer together, and we're subscribing to that. So if I didn't do any mistake, after 5 seconds and a reload, it should actually go to the next slide. I hope it's working. Fingers crossed. OK, let's make this a quick live debugging session. Cannot read property page X carousel component. What 100? Well, it would also be good to say go to next page instead of previous page. That might help. All right. Yeah, there we go. If you use the proper constant, it's also working. Amazing. OK, that was a little bit mean, as while it was going to the next slide, I was closing the console. So technically, it's more or less working. You didn't saw that. This is a feature, not a bug. OK, let's go back to my slides, actually. And because I'm well aware that this might be fairly fast for some of you, let's give a quick summary of what we just did. So what happened now? We have our touch start event, where we merge together all the touch starts and mouse down just to treat them equally. For touch start, I had to specify a minor tweak, as technically a touch event can support multi-touch gestures. So besides that, we use switch map so that we're saying, OK, as soon as this touch start happens, please listen to all the touch move gestures. And within this touch move, what we said is, OK, again, we want to be able to support touch and mouse gestures, so please merge them together. And if one of those emits something, apply the animation frame scheduler. It will just make the animation look a little bit smoother. Take until is our trigger to say, at what point of time we are not interested in any further values of our move events. And for a swipe gesture, this is mouse up or touch end. Here, this is also, again, the calculation logic that I did to estimate the value from the, or to calculate the delta from the start point where the user clicked the first time to the point where the user clicked the last time before he released the mouse. And this last value is then emitted with the take last. And therefore, we also need this take until, because take last will wait for the observable to complete and then emits the last value from there. OK. We merge together all our events so that we can later on, again, treat them similarly. Here, we merge them together with timer, as this kind of logic is then going for all observables as well. So in here, we have the logic to animate the slides. And we have, very important, the take until operator to specify when to unsubscribe from our observable. Otherwise, all the event listeners will persist, will be registered for the whole time of the application till garbage collection kicks in. And even more important than unsubscribing, subscribing. Nothing will happen when you don't subscribe to an observable. And honestly, like 99% of the cases when I'm cursing at RxJS, how shitty it is and nothing is working, it's because I forgot to subscribe to an observable. OK, that was our swipe gesture. For the keyword navigation, what we have here is, again, the from event operator, where we listen to all key down events that happen. By using filter, we then filtered out all events, or actually, we just get all the events that are happening on the A key. And if an event on the A key happens, then just pass through the go to previous page. Same goes pretty much for right arrow. Just the fact that we, instead of using key A, we use key D, and we say, OK, go to the next page. Here's, again, the calculation logic, which is really just one more than the threshold or one less to go to previous or the next, the previous or the next page. Yes. By merging it together with our events observable that we already subscribed to, this is all we had to do to add this feature. These, like, in total, maybe 8 lines of code, where everything that we need to do to add keyboard navigation to our carousel. Yes, that's what I said. We subscribe to that, and we're good to go. OK, timer is, within this example, probably the most complex one, as it requires a lot of knowledge about RxJS. So what we have here is using interval to specify an interval that every 5 seconds will emit a value. Because we want our interval to restart when one of the events happen, we're using take until. But this will just complete our source observable. Therefore, no further value will be emitted afterwards. When observable completes, it's that. That's that. Therefore, we use repeat when and say, OK, please repeat when the source observable completes. Map 2 going to the next page. So we're pretty much just saying, OK, as soon as one of those interval emits something, pass through the go to next page value so that we can say, OK, after 5 seconds, go to the next slide. This tab operator in between here is, this is where I had animate back to first slide. That's the logic for that. It's really just saying, OK, when you're on the last slide and you want to go further, go back to the last slide, to the first slide again. We merge it into our events together with our events observable, and we're pretty good to go. So this were now 10 lines of code, and we again added a whole new feature to our observable, to our feature. So this is what I wanted to show you with live coding, as I think this example really shows the strength of RxJS, that it's very good to add new features on an existing code base. What I now want to talk to you is give you some kind of teaser what we plan for the next version of RxJS, the next major version for sure. Please notice that right now version 7 is in alpha or beta, I think. And we really appreciate any feedback on that. So if you have a spare minute and want to try it out, it's already very good in terms of quality assurance, as it's already running in Google production right now. But if you want to play around with it, give us feedback, please do so. We really appreciate it. Okay, what we plan for that version is the main theme for this whole major release is actually improving typing. So I'm sorry if you're not using TypeScript. From my point of view, you should, but this is a whole different talk. But we are improving a lot the typings of RxJS itself. We're also doing some kind of preparation for version 8 that I'm actually hiding a little bit right now. So here you go. This is pretty much, we are planning this step in between, as we have really great plans for version 8. But if we would do them right now, this would actually require a lot of breaking changes, and we don't want all the applications out there to break. But this is, therefore, we plan this step in between to make it a little bit more gracefully. The next thing that I'm actually super excited about is the animation frame observable. I will come back to that later. And by now, I should replace concat with star with, as we added a lot of new operators that used to be there but got deprecated. I will come to that as well. So let's dive into the typings. What we have here for the typings is actually, if you're already using RxJS, you might face that. So especially in terms of NGRX, such a pattern like shown here is fairly common. You have a switch map operator, and in that you're using a ternary if. And before version 7, this was actually not able to be inferred properly, as it was just inferred to, okay, this will return some kind of object. We don't know what. Which is clearly wrong, as we can absolutely infer that. As we know, okay, if this value is true, we will get an observable of number. Otherwise, we'll get an observable of string. And actually, RxJS 7 is fixing that. And this not just go for switch map, but any observable that takes a function as argument that returns a new observable. Fairly similar is actually the concat operator, which where you can pass a lot of observables. And before version 7, the inferration was not really well. It was to a maximum of 4 or 5 values, if I remember correctly. And if you hit this limit, then afterwards it was just saying, okay, I don't know what this is. So pretty much the TypeScript compiler was saying that. Now with version 7, it is properly inferring that to an unspecified amount of observables that you pass there. The new things about reduce are actually fairly exciting. And the same goes actually for the scan operator. So before version 7, the value of the accumulator itself was taken for the returned observer, which kind of makes sense, as the accumulator is the return type, the return value of the whole reduce statement. But in our case, we're just specifying any here because we're lazy, but a string plus something will in any case be a string. Therefore, instead of using this accumulator function, but the return type of this function, we were able to get the value to properly infer this value. Again, same goes for scan operator, which are from the behavior fairly similar. Last but not least is actually the filter observable. So if you want to filter out all the faulty values, what you could do is pass the Boolean constructor function to that. Before version 7, due to a lack of typings, this was inferred to observable of unknown. Now this is fixed, and a filter won't change the return type of the observable anyway. It just changed the amounts of values that are passed through. Now this type is properly inferred, and no weird behavior on that. Okay, This is just a rough overview on all the typings that we fixed, but this is probably the stuff that you might notice. Let's come to the animation frame observable, as this is the thing that I'm super excited about. Before I dive into that, this is also the thing that is the most discussed within the core meeting, as we are still figuring out how to add testing capabilities for that. Therefore, it might be the case that this will go as a user-landed third-party library, even though it's maintained by one of us in the core team. Just that you're aware of that. This might not land in RxJS core. We'll see. We're still working on that. But what the animation frame observable is pretty much doing, it's emitting each elapsed milliseconds between each animation frame. So pretty much when the browser was idle, it will say, okay, to the last animation frame, to the last time the browser was idle, there were 5 seconds passed, even though 5 seconds is ridiculous long. What you could use this for is to build such a tween function. And with such a tween function, you would be able to move a div. This might not sound that exciting as it is, but when you use this, you are able to implement animations in a reactive manner, which looks like this. Isn't this super exciting? Have you seen how smooth this animation was? It might be due to streaming and everything that this wasn't super smooth for you, but I promise you, on my screen, it's super smooth. I know working on my machine is like the most famous last words in software development, but it is super smooth. Okay, the concat operator. And what I'm now talking about will also go for zip, fork join, pretty much every operator that falls in that kind of category. So before version 7, you were able to specify concat as some kind of creation function. So the concat function returned a new observable for you. This was quite convenient for easy observable case where you just want to concat those or merge two observables like I did in the example before. But if you have more complex observe or reactive behavior where you want to apply some operators on the first observable and some others on both and stuff like that, then it would be quite convenient to have an operator that you can pass to the pipe function so that you can specify an amount of operators that will go to the, or that will be applied to the source observable, and all the operator below concat with will be applied to both observables. Something like that actually used to be there already. So if you did RxJS before version 6, you might be familiar with that. Just for naming collision, we removed that. But with concat with, merge with, zip with, etc., this would come back in the next major version. This is all I got content-wise. What I really want to encourage you to get, if you're interested in RxJS and want to leverage this powerful library, I cannot encourage you enough to practice. Honestly, reading the docs is super difficult right now. This is something that we are working on, definitely. But just from reading about such an abstract and complex topic, from my point of view, it's very difficult to understand it and apply it in daily life. Therefore, I learned the most by redoing stupid stuff. It doesn't really matter what it is. I just wanted to implement something with RxJS. And therefore, I was able to understand more about this library, how some operators work and stuff like that. And this helped me to get this mind shift from imperative programming to reactive programming. So here are some things that listed that I would encourage you to do on your own to get more into that. So like redoing the same is a very good strategy because you now know the code. I will also share the code afterwards. And you will be able to understand how some of the things work that I did. Very similar is actually implementing a drag and drop feature. It's also touch down, move, touch end. Fairly similar. Like the RxJS 101 is a type ahead search, and this is also something that we in the RxJS team want as some kind of tutorial section. So kind of like the Angular tour of heroes. but still, a type ahead search is a very good example to understand RxJS and apply this operator or this library in a useful way. And a little bit more complex is actually long polling. I've seen several different implementations of long polling with RxJS, and all of them are very different, but each has its own advantage kind of thing. So there are many ways how to achieve that with RxJS. Here are the link to the slides and a link to the code repository that also includes the slide, but also the code examples. And this is all I got so far. I'm really thankful for being at this conference. I really appreciate talking about RxJS. So if you have any questions afterwards or want to chat about RxJS or facing issues with it, don't hesitate to reach out to me on Twitter, as this is probably the easiest way to contact me, as I'm not so good with mails. Yeah, again, thanks a lot. I really, really appreciate doing this.